Hello, everybody. This is Ian Coyote for Siofra's Magic Alcove, and I wanted to do a little video about enlightenment for you. Um, some of you may notice I'm without my teeth again. They broke again, so, oh well, I guess that's what happens when you're this age. Apparently I have strong jaws or something. I keep breaking them. This time I was eating a piece of cake, crumb cake, when they just snapped. Anyway, what is enlightenment? What does that even mean? Why would we want it? Is it even possible? So, this is something which will take way more than one video to delve into thoroughly, so we'll just start at an easy place to begin with. So, let's start by saying what we mean. I'm all about old age enlightenment, not new age enlightenment, because a lot of the new age stuff hasn't been proved over the years. If it's new age and you use that term for it, I want to go into stuff that's been used for thousands of years and works effectively. First, how did I get started into this? How did I realize that it was something to search for? Well, to start with, and how do I know it's real? So it is real. Short answer, it is real. Enlightenment of various sorts, and they're completely accessible and can happen to anybody. Though it may happen within this lifetime or it may happen in other lifetimes, but it is there. It is available for everybody. It's everybody's birthright to become developed. And I don't like the term enlightened as such for a number of reasons. It's mostly because of all the reasons, all the meanings it has attained that have nothing to do with the real subject. So the way I look at it, in my terms, I would almost term it more of a getting freedom from your own limitations and bindings and all these things which have built up like an accretion around you. Okay, you get yourself free of those, you could call yourself enlightened. Well, what does that mean, really? So, first off, let me state that there are many different types of enlightenment. What I'm going to refer to as enlightenment, like I say, I would term liberation myself, rather than enlightenment, because enlightenment makes it sound like maybe you're better than other people. I'm enlightened and you're not. So I like liberation better because it refers to yourself. What are you liberated from? I'm liberated from all my obstacles, from stopping myself. I'm liberated from my bad habits. I'm liberated from the tyranny of the mind. It covers a lot of subjects. So what does enlightenment bring you? Well, the one we're going to talk about is the enlightenment whereby a person finds what is termed the true self, and is the type of enlightenment talked about in Zen and in Kashmir Shaivism from India, in the Kundalini aspects and things. And there are a lot of ways to approach and attain enlightenment, and not all of them are suitable for everybody. But it's everybody's birthright and can be attained by everybody by virtue of being human. And it's going to be easier for some people than others. So, where are you when you reach your true self? Well, I'm not there yet. But I can tell you what I have gleaned from the writings of others, and I will add not just from writings, but we got to start somewhere here. So, what I can glean, when you reach this state, your ego drops away. And what does that mean? Well, there is your ego in the term that people say, oh, you got a big ego, or a lot of hubris, that type of thing. But I'm considering it almost as, it's almost like your whole personality, to a certain extent, is all false. All your personality and all of the things you do in this world, for most people, as they are born, they bring up things happen to them, bad things, good things. These create what are called, and I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, forgive my pronunciation. I'm going to talk a lot about a lot of Indian terminology here. My pronunciation is probably not good because a lot of it has come from reading and reading books. So, but they're termed samskaras. And these are things that have happened to you in the past that build up and they get embedded deeply in you, very deeply in you. And you don't, at some point, most of them, you won't even know they are there. They just seem to be the way you automatically react. But a lot of these things have been programmed into your life, learning what's good, what's bad, everything. And you've got an accretion of all these events, these life events around you, throughout you, that modify the way you behave. And most of them, because they come up through our society and stuff, are based on what I would call false principles, mistaken belief systems and things, because you're brought up in a non-illuminated environment. Speaking for the majority of people, if you're brought up in an environment with illuminated people, you're very lucky. So reaching this point happens gradually, but it also happens suddenly, usually, like in Zen. There's a sudden breaking of this. You can imagine it like an external accretion surrounding you that you believe is you, and it breaks or dissolves away at some point and goes away. And then you're left with the essential you. Now, Eckhart Tolle describes this experience as saying that he hated himself. He got so he couldn't stand himself. It started feeling like there was two of him and he couldn't stand himself. And that was the beginning of this recognition between the true self and the accretion that's around you. And once this drops off, you're then free from a lot of things. So a greatly liberating experience that lets you see the truth, and if it's real, it changes a person deeply. And I'm going to talk more about the Hindu part right now because that's what I've been studying more than the Zen aspects, though the Zen seems wonderful too. So first, you realize that you are everything, you're throughout all things. In a sense, you are God. Okay? And rather than make you feel superior to everybody, God is throughout all things and everybody. So instead, feeling like this, like you are God, it doesn't make you feel hubris or over anybody. It makes you feel one with everybody and everything. Where the word namaste comes in, it means I recognize the divinity of your soul as the same as the divinity in my soul, and we're both divine. So this is not something that you can just say and accomplish. It usually only comes after years of effort. So that's one of the reasons I'm not fond of people who say namaste a lot and all that, because most of them who use it do not really mean you are my soul to the point where I would do anything for you I would do for myself. To keep myself alive, I would do that for you because you and I are the same and you're as important as I am. So that releasing of that self-importance is one of the distinctive characteristics of this aspect of enlightenment. And there are many, many smaller enlightenments that can lead up to it, and many other different types. But this is usually what they mean when they say you become enlightened, because it makes an obvious change in the inner self and the outer behavior of the individual who goes through it. And another way to look at this, as I've seen it in the past, looking at it through my own situation, is like when you interpret the world, you can imagine as if you imagine an aura around you, but imagine that you're physically seeing through this, and this thing is composed of a bunch of different pieces of stained glass of all colors, and it's all surrounded by you, and everything you have to perceive about the universe in all ways comes through this stained glass, so it comes to you in all sorts of colors. In other words, what you perceive before the dissolving of this is you perceive, say, these colors are all different biases that are in you that get put there naturally through society. It is not abnormal. In fact, it's normal to have all these biases and things. But what they do is color your reality in a way that's not accurate. So you have all these things and all these filters you're looking through, and to become freed, enlightened, liberated from all that means you get to see reality and truth as it is. And eliminating all that stuff just makes a person amazing. Now, at this point, I'll just mention a couple of examples of, actually, maybe I'll just mention one right now. This guy, Sri Ramana Maharshi. Now, he was a totally enlightened guru, and there's a lot to say about him. But in this short video, if you want a guru to study and look after, he's been dead for many years. Sri Ramana Maharshi is one that I know was fully realized. From reading his books and things, you can tell if you learn the signs and learn to experience that. Another one I get a lot of stuff from is Swami Muktananda, and this guy here. And I believe he was fully enlightened also. He went through the route of Kundalini, Guru worship and awakening the Kundalini. The Kundalini was the main form of arousal we went through. He got the Kundalini awakened through his worship of Swami Nityananda, his guru. So there are some out there you can read about. Now, how do we know this all isn't just words? I was at this stage at a point where I was thinking, it's great. I can read all these things about enlightenment and illumination from all these people. But how do I know it's not all just words? They all say, do this and do that, worship this God, worship that God, do these practices, do that practice. But I don't see enlightened people in the world. I don't meet them personally. How do I know? Well, I'll tell you what started me on my path of finding some truly illuminated people to worship. And I might also mention that despite the fact that I'm going in this strictly with more Eastern ideas and methods of illumination, like Franz Barden's books will lead you to and through illumination of all sorts. It's harder to determine from his books because he doesn't mention exactly the results that you will get. He doesn't mention the mystic states that you will undergo. He just says, accomplish this, accomplish that. You will, if you accomplish these things, like he says, you will attain the mystical states and enlightenment. In fact, you will start experiencing some different mystical states and enlightenments from the second degree on, and I would say for some people even from the first, and that's another subject because it can be hard to get through the first chapter for a lot of people for various reasons I'll have to talk about in another video. But for me, aside from Barden and the Western methods, because I talk about those all the time, I found this one called The Path, Autobiography of a Western Yogi by Swami Kriyananda. And I don't necessarily recommend this book because I have now found better books, but this one was the one I found first, and it talked about Swami Rudrananda, who was did various aspects, including he had a background of something called, and I don't know how to pronounce it, so I'll just spell it, S-U-B-U-D. And he had that as his background, and then he got instruction and teaching and Shaktipat from Swami Nityananda and Swami Muktananda. I'm not sure, Swami Nityananda might have been dead at the point he was going through initiation, but he considered him as guru also. And then he talks about him, and what got me interesting was his talk about what he experienced. He talks about experiencing Shaktipat directly as being an energy that hits you and bam, things happen. So this is like materially discernible. And from that book, I followed it out a ways, and I followed some aspects and wanted to find out about Swami Rudrananda, who is also now deceased. And as I was reading about it in this book by Swami Kriyananda, and he talks about a gentleman by the name of Michael Shoemaker, I believe, who was there with him, and also learning from the guru, who they called Rudy. Swami Rudrananda, but his name was actually Rudy, I believe. So, pardon me, we'll have to cut that out. Swami Michael became Swami Chaitananda, and Swami Chaitananda received initiation from Swami Muktananda, and he's got the lineage from the whole line, and he's the guru that for Indian type of stuff and that I have received Shaktipat from, and wish to go receive. Now he's moved to a point where he's within a couple hours driving distance of where we live. So I'm hoping to be able to arrange to make some trips down there and sit with some of his open-eyed meditations or satsang. I decided that it was real and I can feel it. And when we received Shaktipat from the Swami, my wife and I were lucky enough to receive Shaktipat. There was a group of probably, 50 to 100 people that were sitting in the open-eyed meditation we were at. And because we had called ahead and I had mentioned my interest in Shaktipat and such, my wife and I were lucky enough, and the Swami and his followers were gracious enough to give us actual Shaktipat, where the Swami comes and puts his hand on our forehead, in this case, our third eye, and gave us an energy boost and helped to awaken us. And prior to this experience at the ashram, one of his followers, great young lady, sat us down, gave us the mantra that they use, there, and uh, didn't mention what she was doing it, but we had her eyes closed in her sitting position, and she tweaked her kundalini, and it was very evident to me. It went zonk, and I almost said, "You did that?" Um, but it was very clear she made sure our kundalini was awakened enough so that we would benefit from the Shaktipat. And these are things you can really feel. So that was the start of me investigating that path, was finding out that there's something out there and it really works. And not only that, it's not just words that can be physically passed along to somebody, only if you're ready. Otherwise, the energy won't do any good. You have to be open to it, you have to accept it, you have to absorb it. And then, as it is said, even getting Shaktipat once is enough if you nurture that as a spark and let it grow into a flame. All of this, however, probably doesn't get too far into telling you what enlightenment really is. Now, there is talk you will hear of superhuman abilities and things coming along with it, and that can certainly happen depending on the development methods you follow. Different things can happen. If you are following a method that awakens the Kundalini, there are specific things that happen with each chakra. If you follow the ways relating to Zen, there are slightly different practices and different things you follow. The Enlightenment basically turns out to be more or less similar if we're talking the real deal. And it's life upheaval. But there's a lot of smaller steps along the way. And the basis of it all really is seeking the truth and seeking your own self-development. These techniques, a lot of them, like the techniques of Barden, they require positive change and self-development. And they're not like Barden's requires the self-development and moral development. If you're trying to go through his system, you can't just pick things out and use them without having undergone the development and stuff he mentions, because he's arranged things very logically that you go through one mystical state to another, and these things build on each other. And if you try to start in the middle without having undergone the previous things, generally you won't get results. And that's because the way he's laid things out. So his whole system is laid out to depend on personal development. And if you aren't developed enough to do the exercises in the first chapter 100%, you're certainly not going to get anything to work in the third or fourth chapter, fifth chapter. You can't just extract things out unless you have all the... I mean, you could if you're developed enough to be able to use those methods already. But that's very few, and most people need to go through it. It's like that way with most Enlightenment procedures. And there are lots of various methods. Zen is one. Barden stuff is another. And all these deserve to be talked about from the perspective of enlightenment, and I think Barden stuff does too. These are the ways you develop all the magical powers and abilities that are talked about. They come almost as a side effect of your development. When you develop yourself and these things come along, you don't try to make them happen. So they're kind of a side effect. A magical power, if you really want to have magical power or mystical power, it depends on that self-development and self-control. And you have to get yourself under control. That is a basic tenet of any form of enlightenment generally. You have to get yourself under control. In some cases, and let me turn this down a little bit. I notice I'm redlining the microphone a little bit, so we'll try and turn it down so that doesn't happen. Now, in some cases, enlightenment can actually happen through such bizarre circumstances as accidents, getting hit in the head, falling on your coccyx, your root chakra, awakening the kundalini, and various things. But generally, um, trying to attain enlightenment isn't like trying to attain enlightenment so much. It's more like sweeping away the stuff that prevents you. And I've used a reference to curling before, but it's kind of like that. You clear away all the obstacles. And even Barton's concentration exercises are that way. You think concentration, bring it in, concentrate. The problem with that is there's always stress. A lot of bringing it in, concentrating, of course, there is a certain amount of that, but a lot of it is actually letting go of all the other things that occupy you and occupy your brain and being able to fully let go of them. And there's where practices like asana and things come in. Sitting in asana properly, you learn to let go of all the things um, well, I guess this isn't directly on enlightenment, but for like the asana in Barton's second chapter, he requires you to do this asana for a half hour. Well, there's more to it. It's not. He speaks of it. He speaks of it as if all you need to do is sit still for a half hour in this position. Okay, but to do that and to really sit still in that position for a half hour requires an ability to mentally focus for a half hour. So you need to have built up the ability to mentally focus for that. I mean, prior to this, otherwise you won't be able to sit in the asana. Your brain will be wandering, and the minute your mind wanders and things, then you start moving. Tensions happen in your body. A lot of tensions and things happen in your body according to what you're thinking of and the way your mind works. So you need to have your mind clear and those thoughts gone. And for learning the asana, you need to focus on just being still and being comfortable. And the real trick is to be comfortable in that position for a half hour. And then you can start meditating in that position as long as you've got the comfort down, and then be completely comfortable. And then when you're meditating, you don't have to focus on this part of your body hurts, that part of your body hurts, because you can just be focused on the mental stuff. You've already taken care of the physical. So while Barton mentions sitting there for a half hour, he doesn't mention that you need to have relaxation of your mind, relaxation of your emotions, and yet not relaxation of them. The asana is a sitting position in which Barton's one that he mentions is sitting up straight in a chair, hands on your knees, relaxed, your back straight, and you're not leaning against the back of your chair, and your knees are together and not separating. And the idea is, if you totally relax, you just fall asleep. You keep just enough tension in your body to focus on just this attention and to use just as few muscles as you possibly can while you're in that position. You want as little muscle tension as is humanly possible while still maintaining that position without, and do it without fidgeting or anything. And you'll find that the less you move, the more still you can be, the more comfortable it becomes. And you're not in a stiff stillness. You need to be relaxed except for the minimum tension to keep yourself poised, just poised. And that's the same thing. You have to accomplish that with your astral body, so your emotions aren't going out all over. They also aren't repressed. They're just still. And you have to have that in your mind and get your mind, if you want to concentrate on something. Part of the problem with concentrating is not just the pulling it in and concentrating on that, because it'll just be like a bunch of pressure to push you back out. If you have things of your day, you're not able to let go of things and all that, they'll just push that right back out. You won't be able to stay concentrated because it'll push it back open. So you have to learn to let go of all those things, the things of the day, all the things you're thinking of, all the thoughts in your mind. Did Uncle Fred say this? I got to repair that thing in the living room. The car needs taken in for servicing. Whatever it is, these things can cause you a problem. So you need to be able to let go of those and go, for right now, just for the purpose of this meditation, I let go of all of them. And then it's not so much that you have to hard focus on what you're trying to focus on. It's that you've let go of everything else, but you're still alert and looking, and you've just got just the one thing to look at. For example, for the visual, he gives some visual meditations where you perceive an object with your eyes open, uh, and you're supposed to have it, be able to see the memory of it clear enough. You look at the object, you take it in your mind, then you put it down and you stare eyes open until you can see it very clearly from your memory, as if, he says, being totally unaware of your surroundings with it floating right before you. And the only way you can do that is if you let go of all this stuff. So it's not just the concentration. You're not allowing on it. You have to learn to let go of all this stuff and then get just it, and then it becomes easy to focus on because you don't have all this other stuff. There's just it. If you want to look at something, there's just it. You just and you can look at it with your mind. And if you can accomplish that, it's a kind of a mystical state wherein everything vanishes away for you. And I usually see it, or notice it vaguely, I should say, when that's happening, I see it kind of as a violet color almost, that everything dissolves into. All my surroundings just kind of turn to this violet, I suppose some people probably see it as a gray, just kind of a blankness, and the object is there by itself. But my point about that is, he doesn't tell you that that's pretty much, if you can accomplish that, you've accomplished this particular mystical state. He gives you exercises in the first chapter to tune all those things in so that you can then do them and accomplish the exercises of the second chapter. But if you don't already have all those abilities that you picked up from the first chapter, then you'll have a lot of difficulty doing the things in the second chapter. Because unless you're already very developed and just naturally already have them at this point, which for most people, including myself, was not the case. So his things can definitely lead to enlightenment, but he doesn't speak about so much. I mean, he mentions the things that are necessary for your continuing practice and continue the exercises, but he doesn't really talk about all these interesting states you will experience if you succeed in his practices. So now, the one person I believe I've met who was in an enlightened state has been Swami Chitanananda. We haven't met him, like talked to him, but he gave us a Shaktipat and stuff, and we've listened to his lectures and things. And he has a very good meditation on tape too, and he deals with the Kundalini method and the tantras, Trika, Tantra, Trika or Trika, probably Trika. I'm not sure how to pronounce that again. So the reason we would want to do this is that everything you want, and the writings, to really get into, you have to read some of the writings of the actual sages. But, read writings of people who have accomplished this. Look at how they lived. I mean, any new age guru or anybody that's going to teach you anything, look at how they live, how their followers live, the people who do their practices, do they succeed? I mean, And these are not always obvious either, because a lot of the things are contrary to the values of our society. One of the things is money. Now, I've got nothing against money. The older gurus would have problems with materialism, and once you reach a certain point, I think there's a balance. You can have money and use it, but not be grossly materialistic. Anybody who's grossly materialistic and making a ton of money certainly can't feel like uh, that namaste thing, my soul is your soul. And, otherwise, the people who become that way usually give away what they have to the poor, to the helpless, things like that. So look at how they live, how their actual morals are, what their behavior is. But, um, and read some of the things of the sages. Uh, it is a very complicated subject, and I figure I'll have to make some videos on separate aspects. For instance, there's a wonderful little text called the Vijnana Bhairava, and I don't have it out here handy. It's on one of my bookshelves over there. I'd have to go look it up. But it has what it calls 112 dharanas, and that's 112 different methods, each a separate meditation on its own, that can lead to uh, full enlightenment if you succeed in it entirely. And it's a wonderful little book, and they're all valuable. Anything of that nature, though, from the sages and things, are usually Indian or Tibetan, are going to require, unfortunately, becoming conversant with the language and the meaning of the language of the different cultures, which definitely differ from meanings in our culture. So you have to not make that mistake and think that something, we attach a lot of bad meanings to things in our culture that are not considered bad in other cultures, and a lot of it's the way they interpret it. So I hope this is being helpful a little bit on enlightenment. Um, so maybe I'll go into like Zen, for example. Their methodology includes sitting in an asana, basically, uh, and that is an important part of the meditation and stuff. They focus on different things. There's moving Zen. There's focusing on the koans, which you've probably heard. The incorrect one of what is the sound of one hand clapping. Well, things like that. That's an incorrect version of that. That's the way it's been spoken of in Western society. There are things like one of the ones I like, and these are meant to be confounding intellectually. What was your face before you were born? What is your true face before you were born? And the idea is to sit and meditate on these things, and they're not solvable by intellect. If you come up with these were sat and then meditated upon, and then there's an interview with the Zen master, I believe the Rashi, however it's pronounced, who determines at once if you've penetrated to the meaning of the koan, and the meanings are not intellectual and verbal. Penetrating to the meaning of a koan doesn't mean you can explain it in verbal terms. While you can, um, the master or the Roshi will see immediately. This is an experiential thing. They will see immediately if you've penetrated to the meaning of the koan or not. And that means they see this development. that comes from the practice that finally happens when you see through to it. It's not through your mind. You get an experience, and then the Roshi, by looking at you, and please, if I've got these terms wrong, correct me, because this is like Zen for Westerners by a Westerner kind of thing. So it's my interpretation. I have not had formal instruction, but they know whether you've accomplished this, and words have nothing to do with it. Two people could say the same thing, and one of them would get a good job, type of thing, and the other one might get smacked on the noggin for saying the same words, because it's not. The Zen master sees it in the actions, the way the words are stated, the look in the eyes. These things are visible to one who has attained that. So that's one of their major methods, and they have some walking Zen they do, and focusing on breathing and some other practices and things. And that's one method towards enlightenment. Another one, of course, is Barden's, which I've mentioned, which that enlightenment comes along the way in his, and he continues beyond, way beyond just that enlightenment. Well, that enlightenment is what people normally speak of, because that's what changes a person, where people see, wow, can see a sudden shift, and that's the one that gets most often spoke of. And there are many ways of accomplishing that. Some of the other ways are Kundalini, for example, Kundalini practices, which would consist of the asana, again, different asanas, and meditating on various aspects. It's a form of yoga. So you have yogic aspects, you have yogic asanas, you have pranayama, which is breathing exercises, you have focusing on the chakras, you have invoking the deities there. The chakras have lotuses, certain petals, which have letters on them. You get energies going there. There's bija mantras associated with the chakras that you say to invoke the energies in those centers and awaken different abilities. The root chakra, if awakened, you have control of the earth element. The svadhisthana, which is the next chakra up at the generative genitals, generative organs is what I was trying to say. And that's the site of water, or of, excuse me, the Muladhara is earth and gives you control of earth. Okay, that one gives you the control of water, the water element, and the bija mantra there. If you go up to the third chakra, which is at your navel, you get control over the fire element with the bija mantra there. So, but you end up becoming enlightened. So there's many varied ways of doing it. Kundalini is considered one of the most effective and most complete and most thorough methods. Also, can be dangerous for beginners. So, like everything, there's many different ways of doing it. There's many different ways of becoming enlightened. But I think believing that it's possible, and it's possible to happen to you, are some of the first steps. And it can, and it can happen to ordinary individuals, and there are exercises and things you can do to make it happen. You have to be dedicated to truth. You have to be dedicated to becoming a better person and behaving in a better fashion, even if you don't feel like that now, or you don't want to. I can accept that there are aspects of enlightenment that sound unpleasant to me at my current stage, but the way this happens is not that you force yourself. You don't, like, okay, so trying to emulate the gurus and things, genuine gurus, okay, is a good way to attract these abilities and things into you, and the influence of that guru if they're a genuine guru. And I talked about those kinds of things in my little video on gurus. But you're not trying to force yourself into a mold. In other words, if there's an aspect of enlightenment I say that doesn't appeal to me in my current condition. Say I'm very material, and I think the idea of, you know, like my brother once said to me once, while he was alive, I tried getting across the idea to him that it's possible to be happy without having a lot of money. To be happy in this world without having a lot of money. He he couldn't accept that on some level. That he could be happy without having enough money. But everything, I mean, so say anything you experience, anything you go through, anything that happens, any happiness, unhappiness, everything is all within us. You know, any happiness, the happiness you have from having lots of money, you can also have without physically having the money. But if you have that, the right attitude, I believe it will come to you. And I'm not there to have lots of money. So still a belief for me at this point. But the idea is that all of these things you experience, everything you experience is a state of you. It's in you. When you see something outside, you're not really seeing it outside of you, so to speak. It's in your brain. It's happening interiorly. Interiorly, you're getting these impressions. Your eyes are catching these light waves from what you're seeing. It's going into your brain, and your brain is making these pictures and everything. So in a way, everything you see and everything you experience is inside you, so that these things, this happiness and all these things are inside you, and they can be maintained inside you regardless of your external circumstances. So if you have this, and if you've been freed from these things, then you can be in the most where most people would find the most dire and deep suffering, and not be suffering, and still be relatively happy. And you realize part of it is realizing that there's more to you than this life. You get connected with the universe also. I mean, it's that state of enlightenment is you have something more. My wife likens it, and this is true too, to the aspects of nature. And she says, really, what nature in this world thinks, what trees, what they all think of her, is much more important to what people actually think of her. She's getting more of that eternal. And you can go farther than that, and you start realizing that you've had many lives. This is not your only life, and you will probably, if you're like most people, continue to have many lives past this one as you develop further, until the time comes when you can live on the other planes and you no longer need to reincarnate on this earth to continue your path to perfection, to development. And we won't argue there is no such thing as perfection, which may be true, but you can certainly aim at it as a goal. It may not be possible for me to be perfectly truthful, but I try as much as I can within reason. And I say within reason because all these things have to be considered within the boundaries of the life you're living. If a little white lie is going to keep from really hurting somebody's feelings badly and won't affect them badly in any fashion, I have no problem with that. The problem with lies if you're giving people the wrong information, if they need to make a decision of any sort and they make it on information you've given them that's incorrect because you wanted to spare their feelings or something, then they're likely to make mistakes and life errors, and you can cause somebody all kinds of damage with white lies if you're not careful. So, but sometimes, I mean, especially, and if it's somebody I'm never going to see again, they're not interested in self-development, and I tell them, your hair looks great, a little white lie or something, and it's going to make them feel good, and they're going to have a happy day rather than going home and feeling bummed about themselves, then maybe that's a little good karma, even if it's a little untrue. So it's a matter of degree. You need to keep it under control. You can't be brutally truthful or everybody will hate you. People really dislike the truth in a lot of cases. So you have to be careful. And in fact, people hate the truth enough that they will be led onto other pathways. And this is turning out to be a long video, but there's a lot to say, and it'll take many more to cover it. But this is one of the things where a causal leads people out of the pathway towards enlightenment. Um, these little things will niggle at them. If a person, the term is the light that is blinding. And I talked about it in one of my other videos where if your context, and you're talking about something that is a context beyond the context of the person you're talking to, then they won't be able to interpret it properly and things get more and more warped. And you can be talking about something beautiful, and because of the person's not readiness for it, they will see it as something, potentially can see it as something awful. And this happens a lot with people who aren't ready to perceive the truth. And so they get led out of the pathway and off the pathway, and it's for their own protection. So there's where some of the aspects of keeping silence come in, because you can hurt somebody with the truth if they aren't ready for it. It can literally, I talked earlier in the video about this ego collapsing and the stained glass that's around somebody that gets all these impressions in, and getting through it and seeing the truth. This is also not easy, and it's painful, and you can't just do that. You will damage a person incredibly if you just take a little hammer from the outside and you break out a piece of that stained glass, say, so they see the truth, and just make them see it. And you need to, this needs to be dissolved from within slowly. These things need to fall away naturally. They can't be forced. Forcing them only does damage. They need to fall away naturally as a growth. You don't pretend to be generous. You become generous. You don't, you want to, you don't want to emulate generosity to become generous in a way that's fake. You want to genuinely become generous, which means you have to feel it. So you're not putting on airs. These things take time to develop and get rid of these things. And the worst thing you can do is to expose somebody to a truth they're not ready for, because it can shatter their world. And I've seen a couple of personal examples of this. One is which was for a friend of mine. Is now a friend of ours. Siofra's and mine. She didn't. She just met him at that time because we were just getting together. But and I mentioned it before in some of my other videos. We did a very, what I thought was a very simple and harmless initiation ritual for him, and she thought so too. And it's a very short ritual. It consisted of maybe 8 or 9 lines on a little piece of paper, and maybe 10 minutes of ritual at the most. And we thought it's a little harmful, it was a ritual of basically being blindfolded and bound to symbolize his lack of freedom, and being bound by his inner things and such, like I was just talking about. You're bound and you want to be liberated from those, and then stepping over the line into the practice of mysticism and magic, and then being released from his bindings and his blindfold once he has stepped over the line and welcomed freedom from these bindings. And that was basically the whole ritual. Well, it impacted him in an incredibly huge way. And unfortunately, that's what happens when it's genuine. It's if it's genuine and real, it's really powerful, even little short. And I was, not that far along in the magical path at that point. Um, well, I mean, I was in my, I don't know, 25, 28, I don't know, somewhere in there. Anyway, it affected him for years to such an extent that afterwards he changed his whole life because of this experience, but not because, well, I guess in the end it did kind of free him and stuff, but he freaked out totally. And for years he was worried and concerned and kept going back to the spot where we'd done the initiation and, trying to work and close it out and get different people to help him and go to psychic healers and all this other stuff from what he perceived to be a negative happening. And um, we just found out recently, I mean, this has bothered him for years now. And if you're watching this, I apologize for airing this because he potentially could be. Um, he is a good friend of mine still. Um, but it was one of those things that he had actually asked me for this. And I have to face the consequences that even now, after all these years, you know, um, now I'm 60. He's equivalently older, and it's still affected his life, and he talks about it a lot. And again, like not as a good thing. He felt like his whole personality was dissolving, and that when he died, he would be gone, and there would be nothing left of him, and he was going to dissolve from his body. And it had a very powerful and unanticipated effect. It was just supposed to be a step onto the pathway. I'm going to step onto the pathway of magic and mysticism. And that's all it was ever intended to be. Um, the problem was I couldn't perceive these things. You know, I broke something in him in that section in his ego or in the stained glass aura around him. Got a little bunk, and it was too much light, and he's still dealing with it. So enlightenment has to happen from within and kind of gradually, though the Shaktipat can help get you there. If you're not ready for it, it won't do anything because it's generally like non-harmful. You absorb it, you let it in, you work with it, and then it works within you and develops you. So that's part of the problem with initiations is sometimes that they can really work and the individual needs to be ready, and it's very hard to tell that for another person. So as people, we are fragile. So you won't, generally these things have to be absorbed gradually. The truths are all out there. All of these truths that we're so worried about and that you mentioned could harm a person and stuff, they're all out there anyway. But they don't force themselves on people. And one of the things the Akasha does, if it's going to harm the person, the Akasha will try to prevent that from happening. It's not like the Akasha is a deity trying to prevent your development. It's more like your own little quirks and things in a person, and what'll happen is they'll be disillusioned about something, they'll find things to distract, and they'll be led off the path naturally if they're not um, open to it. So you never want to force the truth on anybody, and if the light makes them say, that's it, I can't deal with that. You always need to let them be, because believe me, I mean, I love my friend, and he wasn't really, I mean, the way he chose to change his life in response to all this has been positive. He's taken it in a positive direction, but it was because this thing caused so much fear and anxiety and trepidation in him to affect him for all these years. And never in my life did I think it would be that powerful. So you have to be really careful, and it's a good reason, you know, to watch out for gurus and groups and things. And at this point, I agree with Barden that his books contain everything you need to get there and to become enlightened. And other methods, such as the ceremonial methods, while they can be very effective, they need to be right for you. You have to be in the right group, and they can be dangerous. Even the lesser dangerous ones, like the Golden Dawn and stuff, anything that really works, that really awakens energy within you, can be dangerous to the individual if they're not ready for it. And um, I'm not quite ready to stop this one right now. So this is going to be a long one. I hope a bunch of people don't get bored and have to divide this into other ones. Yeah, maybe I will stop it now. I was going to mention the aspects of Gopi Krishna and the problems he had with Kundalini, because he did not intentionally arouse the Kundalini, and he had not followed the proper procedures to ensure that he was open to the energies, and he got some of the energies set off within him, and it caused him all kinds of physical things, including um, almost bringing about his death. But that was because he was not trying to awaken it when it awakened, and he had not done all the preparations necessary. So if you follow your common sense and do things right, these things aren't dangerous, but you have to follow your stuff. And it's a tough nut to crack overall. But the one thing I wanted to make clear in this is that I believe in the Enlightenment. I've read some books by enlightened people, especially if you read the things by Sri Ramana Maharshi. He's got to the real self. Um, I believe he used mostly tantric, and by tantric, again, I'm going to specify, because we're dealing with a Western audience here, we're not talking sexual tantra. By using tantric yogic methods, he attained his enlightenment. He was sounds like a wonderful man. He lived on a holy hill. Um, Apparently, animals just loved him. And all animals and all people just loved him, and he um, would radiate a deep inner peace. And to learn from him and to study with him, you had to do nothing more than to be in his presence and absorb this inner peace that he radiated. And he directly radiated the enlightenment and illumination into people who were ready for it. And it doesn't mean they didn't have to do any practices to cleanse and prepare themselves. There's an aspect of yoga, it's called the 8 limbs of yoga, and one of them is all the purifications and preparing yourself, and another one has to do with morality, and it's a long list which we'll deal with in yoga videos. So if all of you like these, I would like to continue doing some more enlightenment videos, because um, I am also following magical practices to attain enlightenment, and trying to use Barden's stuff to the utmost to attain my enlightenment while I do Barden's works. But I also use these other methods because for reasons, specific reasons Barton had, which he mentions in his books, he doesn't mention some aspects uh, because they can mislead people, or or things like that. But I like to take advantage of all the sources I have to try to uh, increase my own self-development. And if you do, like I say, I highly encourage self-development in people trying for their own enlightenment. But you have to be careful, number one, um, not to injure yourself, and make sure that you're true to wanting to become enlightened and to develop yourself, and that it's not about your ego, about somebody thinking you're a good meditator. And that's part of the reason also for Barden mentioning to not say where you're at in his exercises, or even that you're doing them, um, because anything that leads to that ego, and if that starts growing, the minute that happens, you're off the path of enlightenment. And you can develop lots of magical abilities and not become enlightened. And um, mantras are a good example, because while some mantras are prayerful, um, most of them are not. Most of them are considered as a power, neither good nor bad. A mantra is a power that you can attain, and you can use it for good purposes or bad purposes. So having this ability to do something that you can gain through one of these mantras doesn't necessarily imply anything about your development, only that you've spent a suitable amount of time and effort on developing the ability to use that mantra. For example, one is for starting fires without, they say, sacrificial fires, and not sacrificial, it's the wrong term. Though that is the right term for some of them. But anyway, yeah, fires for various purposes, various religious ceremonial um, purposes should be lit by mantra, and not with the flame of a lighter or something. And that I've read enough stuff and seen enough accounts to believe that that actually happens, and that belief in that kind of stuff only comes through enough experiences and enough, readings through people who aren't doing it to advance their ego. Like Sri Ramana Maharshi, he is a perfect example. And if you want to study some more recent, a little more recent, there's Swami Nityananda, Swami Muktananda, and Swami Chaitanananda, which is of their lineage. This is also of the Siddha lineage. So there's Siddha Yoga, which is a whole organization. And a Swami there is Guru Mai, who was Swami Muktananda's student. One of the things I don't like about them is their big emphasis on money at this point. Um, I don't know if it still is, but I know it used to be where to watch the Swami on a video, you had to go to a special location, or it was beamed in, and pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars to watch her lecture on a video, to receive her Shaktipat through an image. And it's just um, appears to me, I have not been a member of that organization, so I can't say, but things like that have appeared to be money grubbing. And to me, that does not go along with enlightenment. I mean, certain enlightened people, um, if they're genuinely enlightened, could handle and deal with money fine and not have it become a hindrance to them, especially if you're already enlightened. The biggest time it's a hindrance is to people who aren't enlightened, and mostly because it's a distraction from enlightenment and following the pathway. So I don't consider that as important. A lot of the fake gurus like to go with that. You must give up materialism, so you must donate all your money and all your things to us. Then you don't own it, and you've given up your, you know, lease on that, and that's, in my opinion, is also bull. I mean, in some rare cases nowadays, for some particular individuals, that might be a good recommendation. But I say for the majority of individuals, depriving themselves of a good, you know, a good way to live and housing and food and stuff is just wrong. Um, the real trick is not to become attached to them like, oh, look what a fancy car. I've got a Camaro and it's, or I've got a Corvette. I got a Porsche 911, $180,000. Isn't my car great? And, if you're enlightened, you probably want a good car. You might want one that's comfortable, to drive around in because you need a car and that type of thing. But, you don't, you might go buy a Lexus if you have enough money or something classy and cool and just want a good car, and that's okay. But you don't, have a Rolls Royce waiting for you every place you might visit, every ashram, every place you've got followers, you have a Rolls Royce rating, so you can be driven around in a Rolls Royce that's been paid for by all your followers. That's a bad idea. And again, that's what happened with the one guru in Oregon that ended up getting kicked out of the United States for what his followers did. So I'm going to leave this one at that because we're just running on and on. Looks like we're a good bit over an hour here, so there'll be more videos on enlightenment, but I would really appreciate to know uh, what interests you the most, what type of things, what sorts of things. I mean, I don't know everything, but I've been interested in this a long time, so I studied a lot of different systems of enlightenment to try to learn what I could from each of them to move me closer to the truth. And of course, also, the more of them you study, the more you can filter out the truth from the midst of all of them. So, all right, blessed be. I thank you all for especially anybody who watched through this long video, and may you become enlightened. Blessed be, if you so desire.